The next panel, it's human-animal encounter with Max Cavitch, Nicholas Ray, and moderator Dominic Drexel, which I would briefly introduce. Dominic holds degrees in social science and conflict research and a PhD in psychoanalytical educational science. Besides his profession in private higher education, his research covers psychoanalytic conceptions of the wish, psychic development regarding wearing the Islamic wheel in Western societies, and more recently also political apocalypticism. Thank you, Dominic, for moderating this panel. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniela, for introducing and also for having this wonderful panel. I might introduce you to Max Cavitch. He's an associate professor of English at the University of Pennsylvania, where he is also founding co-director of Penn's undergraduate program in psychoanalytic studies. His research and teaching bridge American and African American literature, cinema, and psychoanalytic studies. He's also, of course, this year's Fulbright Freud visiting lecturer of psychoanalysis at the Freud Museum, Vienna. Max Cavitch also hosts the blog Psyche on Campus, collecting several reflections over, I think now, a span of 5 years? 6 years. And all these reflections are concerning engaging in psychoanalysis in undergraduate education and public debate. His own reflections have only recently resulted in the monograph Psychoanalysis and the University, Resistance and Renewal from Freud to the Present. Max Cavitch's focus on Freud's conceptual legacies, for instance, interrogating the role of the death drive and unconscious processes, has been able to open dialogue between psychoanalysis and broader humanistic inquiry, positioning Freud not as a relic, but as a living tool for cultural criticism.
Thank you.
I think they will unmute you.
Unmuted? Okay. Can people hear me? I don't know if mute is still on. All right. Thank you very much, especially for that last bit. I don't know if I can take credit for all of that, but it's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to see you all here. And I first of all want to thank Daniela and Herman very much for organizing this conference and for allowing me to be part of it. This paper that I have for you, excuse me, is really just a first stab at an article that is related to, but not part of the book that I'm working on here, a book about dogs and psychoanalysis. So this paper is very much a work in progress, and I will welcome any and all criticisms and suggestions that you might have for me. Okay. A man who kicks a dog is the very symbol of human depravity and of the meanness and contemptibility of those who inflict gratuitous violence on non-human beings. His act may have multiple motives, though it's such an obvious indication of displaced aggression that the phrase "kick the dog" is a cultural commonplace in many languages. A man who kicks a dog is likely lashing out at the innocent creature because he can't direct his rage or frustration at its true and likely more powerful and dangerous object. And a man who kicks a dog on camera and is then seen doing so by millions of people is sure to become a universal pariah. But what if the kick isn't a wanton act of cruelty or displaced aggression, but instead part of a working relationship? Moreover, what if the dog isn't a biological dog, but a robot named Spot, a machine designed to look and act in many ways like a dog, but without a biological animal's acknowledged sentience? Consider first one of the most infamous kicks in the history of Western philosophy. On a visit to the Oratoire in Paris, the 18th century French academician Fontenelle saw the philosopher priest Malebranche kick a pregnant dog. The dog cried out in pain. which provoked a corresponding cry of compassion from Fontenelle, with whom the stridently Cartesian Malebranche remonstrated, "Don't you know that it feels nothing?" 3 centuries later, people flinched again, just as Fontenelle had, at seeing an engineer kick Spot, the robotic dog, in a YouTube video posted in 2015. And I'm now going to play for you just 4 or 5 seconds of that promotional video, if I can. Okay. You get the picture. There were many people, of course, who derided the robot sympathizers using the same argument made by Malebranche, for however absurd it is to think that non-human animals are non-sentient machines, Spot is such a machine, made of steel, aluminum, titanium, plastic, and other inorganic materials designed by human engineers to appear dog-like and programmed to behave in dog-like ways. Spot feels nothing. So what rational, rather than merely childish and sentimental, foundation or purpose could there be for such a compassionate response? At Boston Dynamics, which is the company that produces Spot and other canid robots, chiefly for the military-industrial complex, Spot's engineers tout their creation with the slogan, quote, "Takes a kicking and keeps on ticking." The kicking administered to Spot by company employees, including this one, during a test of its, quote, "super canine stability," unquote, has been viewed in the company's promotional video over 32 million times since it first appeared on YouTube 10 years ago. Back then, a reporter showed the video to a random sampling of people, many of whom reacted as if it were an actual biological dog being kicked. And many hundreds more expressed their outrage online, thereby raising the question of the robotic dog's moral status, and doing so not only at a pivotal point in the history of artificial intelligence and robotics, but also in the shadow of the still unresolved question of the moral status of living dogs. The capacity to feel pain has been a desideratum of moral status, at least since the 19th century philosopher Jeremy Bentham argued with regard to non-human animals, that the question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? However, recent ethicists have challenged this utilitarian welfarist approach on the grounds that it obscures modes of animal and human agency in social life by narrowing the focus of moral concern to sentience, or even to the negative states and passive features of vulnerability and suffering. One AI and robotics expert has said the only way it's unethical is if the robot could feel pain. Yet both psychological and physical pain are often extremely difficult to recognize, to define, and to quantify, especially with regard to non-reporting subjects. Who speaks for Spot about his capacity to suffer? And is that the question that matters most in a discussion of Spot's moral status? The rapid evolution of robotics has generated fresh social and ethical challenges and intriguing questions about the autonomy, responsibilities, and even rights of robots. Many of them the same questions we've been asking for a long time about non-human animals. Yet for the most part, the field of robotic ethics has considered robots anthropocentrically, that is, chiefly as human cyborgs and humanoid embodiments of AI. For decades, the focus of the dreams and anxieties that help inspire the representations of robots in popular culture has tended to be anthropomorphic robots and their potential to menace and even replace the human beings they resemble. Think, for example, of films like Blade Runner, I, Robot, Automata, Ex Machina, and Ich bin dein Mensch. It's easy to see that before long, such sophisticated humanoid robots and synths will be more than mere fantasy. Our conference program announces that, quote, today we are in the age of the Anthropocene and transhumanism, which marks nothing less than the beginning of a new civilization, unquote. I think most of us are probably inclined to be a little bit skeptical of such hyperbole. Nevertheless, our skepticism doesn't protect us from what Jonathan Lear identifies as a possibly unprecedented cultural pressure to feel anxious about the future. And like Jonathan Lear, many of us seek to understand such anxiety from a psychoanalytic perspective, which is, of course, also a metaphysical or geisteswissenschaftliche perspective. Metaphysically speaking, psychoanalysis is an excellent example of what the philosopher Giorgio Agamben calls the anthropogenic machine. And while psychoanalysis remains the most sophisticated and comprehensive account of human nature, it has all but ignored two inescapable aspects of what we now, as human beings, are becoming. The first is increasing awareness of the human animality that the anthropogenic machine seeks to repress. The second is our evolutionary entanglement with the increasingly sentient machines that we're creating. Indeed, contemporary robotics has so altered the character of inanimate matter that, as Marina Warner puts it, consciousness is smeared all over the waves and wires that connect us to one another and to ourselves. Oh, I'm sorry. We now find ourselves living at the techno-ontological threshold of a post-biological evolution. Many human and non-human beings already have robotic body parts that are at least partly controlled by computers, and various animals, including humans, have been fitted with increasingly sophisticated brain-to-computer interfaces. Dogs have also long been used as human prostheses. A common example is the harnessed guide dog or seeing eye dog, which acts in several prosthetic ways. For example, by functioning as the human's eyes, by transmitting the visual information the dogs receive to their human through movement, gesture, and vocalization, by functioning as extensions of their human's body, by navigating potentially hazardous spaces and situations, and by making them more visible to others, and by functioning less tangibly as projections of human selves or self-states in social situations. In the realm of disaster response, dogs are also integral to smart emergency response systems, which deploy teams of autonomous vehicles and robots, human-operated robots, and highly trained search and rescue biological dogs fitted with modular cybernetic suits, which can be rigged with a variety of different kinds of sensors and other monitoring and communication devices. These rigs are employed in a range of so-called cyber-physical systems that permit the two-way communication of data, transmitting tactile prompts and verbal commands to the dogs from their remote handlers. In addition to canine cyborgs, canine robots abound in the world of robotic entertainment and toys. They're also widely used as companion animals for the elderly. For example, Hasbro's companion pet pup, a robotic golden retriever, was designed specifically to combat loneliness in the elderly. And its manufacturer highlights, quote, its realistic fur, bark-back technology, and built-in sensors that recognize human touch. It's equipped with 6 sensors in various parts of its body that trigger different actions when touched. Petting either of the pup's cheeks will make it nuzzle your hand, or gently rub its back to experience a heartbeat sensation. The pup will look towards its owner when spoken to and respond with aforesaid bark-back technology, unquote. Hasbro's pup is designed to elicit in human beings tactile and psychological sensations of intimacy, comfort, and companionship. The relationships that humans develop with such lifelike robots are hardly surprising, given the powerful sense of connection felt by humans during warfare, for example, with robots that have absolutely no animal-like morphology whatsoever, like the bomb disposal robots known as packbots. A picture of one there. According to one observer, some soldiers have emotionally bonded so closely with the bomb-disposing packbots that have saved their lives in many cases that they sob when the robot meets its end. Human attachment to inanimate objects takes numerous forms, many of which date from early childhood, before humans develop a secure sense of the difference between the animate and the inanimate. Indeed, we never develop a wholly secure sense of such a difference, which helps account for certain experiences of what Freud calls the uncanny, such as the feeling of anxiety that can be generated by an inability to tell whether an object is animate or inanimate. Rediscovering a long-lost object to which one was at some point strongly attached can trigger various memories, emotions, somatic excitations, haptic expressions, associative roots, and the conscious or unconscious elaboration of ideas. Such objects might be hard to resist touching or manipulating. One might feel the urge to linger with or reclaim them as early cathexes are reactivated, or might endure disappointment and even grief at finding that these early cathexes have dissipated or been withdrawn. For many adults, having a relationship with a pet is a form of compensation for such losses and for the lost animate world of childhood itself. Because pets themselves are childlike, disinhibited beings, relatively speaking, they're also convenient hosts for the projections of repressed instinctual life, which their humans, in turn, become responsible for taming and keeping in check. Indeed, having a sense of control over a pliant and dependent creature has always been one of the more insidious attractions of having a dog. Whether or not we like to admit it, those of us who keep dogs as pets exert tremendous control over their lives, so much so that some philosophers and activists have denounced pet keeping entirely as something inherently unethical, arguing that the best way to relate to animals is to leave them alone. Yet dogs and humans continue, dogs and humans particularly, continue strongly to be drawn to one another. We've co-evolved effectively to help one another thrive in many ways. In effect, we've evolved to keep faith with one another. And of course, the name Fido, from the Latin word for faithful, has been a popular dog name for centuries and has become a quasi-generic term for dog as such. Yet dogs are neither universally nor uniformly faithful or obedient, and it can be especially upsetting when a beloved, good-natured dog turns on its human companion in reaction, say, to fear or to pain. And if the dog is large and powerful, a lapse in obedience and fidelity can be frightening, even dangerous, precisely because humans tend to make such substantial narcissistic investments in their dogs and to keep them so very close in our homes and even in our beds. This special relationship between humans and dogs makes the canine morphology of many robots more than a matter of engineering pragmatics. For while it's certainly true that many animals, including dogs, have evolved advantageous physiological structures that are usefully adapted in robot design, there are other intended gains as well. Making robots look like dogs and equipping them with the capacity to imitate affective responses and gestures encourages us to believe that they have internal self-states of their own and can react emotionally as well as cognitively to their human partners. This is true of Hasbro's companion pet pup, and it's no less true of Spot and other high-tech AI-equipped zoomorphic robots that not only facilitate attachment to a robot object, but also encourage what might be called, after Freud's description of the temporary suspension of reality testing, in the experience of mourning, a form of hallucinatory wishful psychosis, or a version of that childlike disregard for the difference between animate and inanimate being. As Sherry Turkle and others have noted, ethnographic studies focusing on children and the elderly indicate that social robots foster the emergence of affective bonds that users tend to describe as reciprocal love and care. Until very recently, this feeling of reciprocal love and care between human and machine would have been chalked up to mere fantasy or delusion. But the experience of reciprocity is becoming harder and harder to dismiss in this way. For instance, more and more people around the world seeking mental health care are turning to AI chatbots, machine interfaces designed to supplement or even replace human therapists. Today, most AI chatbots are modeled on cognitive behavioral therapy, which works best when done repeatedly for short intervals, thus providing at least a modicum of effective care for thousands, even millions of patients who can't afford or access human therapists. But tomorrow's large language model programs are aimed at the creation of far more sophisticated, interactive, psychodynamic AI psychotherapists. Last year, the American Journal of Psychoanalysis published the results of one psychoanalyst's experimental interaction with the large language model that we all know as ChatGPT, including a fairly sophisticated and methodologically consistent set of dream interpretations. This experiment led the author to propose an analogy between the human unconscious and ChatGPT's lightning-quick algorithmic foundation. The author of this particular article stopped short of describing their interaction as unconscious communication, but their implication is that we'll soon have AIs that will easily pass the Turing test of human subjectivity and function as autonomous and ethical beings, convincingly communicating and perceiving affective as well as cognitive responses and evoking internal responses in human patients while also effectively monitoring signs of their own internal, as it were, unconscious algorithmic responses. Belief, not just in the agency, but also in the subjectivity of robots, will continue to be tested, in part, by how our perception of these robots affects our desire and willingness to harm them. Recall Boston Dynamics' selling pitch for Spot. It takes a kicking and keeps on ticking. They're saying that Spot's ability to function can literally stand up to a human's deliberate attempt to knock it down. Implicitly, they're also assuring potential buyers that Spot will not retaliate against the human who kicks it, as many real dogs, of course, would. Today, Spot is incapable of either vengeance or forgiveness. But what if, tomorrow, it were? What if some future version of Spot not only has moral status, but also a moral sense? Increasingly, the subjectivity of AI-equipped robots, including robot therapists, will be tested by how convincingly they demonstrate their ability, psychically, so to speak, to withstand and survive the destructive impulses of their human patients, just as patients have always needed to be convinced that their human psychoanalysts and psychotherapists can survive their hatred and aggressivity. For the time being, our anxieties about autonomous AI robots disobeying and even subduing and eradicating humans are meant to be assuaged by robots that exhibit features and attributes of man's so-called best friend. This is what accounts for the widespread consternation at the Boston Dynamics video and for the vilification of the engineer shown kicking Spot as if he were motivated by malice rather than by a rather crude application of the scientific method. Or, and I'm coming now to the end of my paper, is scientific method being used here, as it so frequently is in so many industries, as a justification for displaced aggression against non-human test subjects? The many hundreds of people who've doxed the engineer for kicking spots seem to think so. And this also raises the question of the potential harm to the engineer. To be harassed and vilified in this way, no matter how blameless one might be, can inflict a substantial narcissistic wound. Hounded, so to speak, by enough people, even the innocent can develop psychologically disabling feelings of guilt and shame. Andrew Solomon and other psychologists have written about the dramatic correlation between rising suicide rates, especially among the very young, and online harassment. An engineer who builds and works with robotic dogs might be especially prone to care for such a machine, despite knowing better than most that it has no reciprocal internal affective experience of being cared for. Such an engineer might well experience remorse for kicking such a dog, especially if other people berate him for doing so. Darian Meacham and Matthew Studley have argued that robots can help create what they call caring environments through expressive movements and responses, regardless of whether they have internal emotional states. Indeed, it seems likely that the caring environments of contemporary human-robot interactions, in which robots are regarded, as it were, psychomorphically, will become increasingly necessary environments for the development of robots able to do much more than merely mimic such internal states. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, Max, for this careful and rich talk. We might open the discussion right away. If there are already questions, remarks. Yeah, please.
Thanks. This is not so much a question as maybe just an experiential account. At the university at which I was not so gainfully employed, the administration introduced wobots for student counseling. So the student counseling services were completely overwhelmed, and then wobots were introduced. It would be interesting to see to what effect. So then I started experimenting with a wobot, and it became absolutely uncanny because this wobot was stalking me. So, you know, I have, it would be interesting also, both of you are working in university environments, in communicating with students and their perceived or articulated needs, and what is going down there.
Yeah.
And how it's been discussed.
Yeah, wobots are everywhere now, and your campus is in good company, and my own is experiencing similar phenomena. First of all, a tremendous crisis in mental health among people in that age cohort. We have skyrocketing suicide rates at my own university and in many others, and an absolutely unfulfillable need for serious mental health care. The university just can't provide, although it is trying. And it has started, tentatively, to supplement the human therapist staff at the mental health center with wobots or some trademarked version thereof. And of course, the younger people tend to be far less skeptical of the potential efficacy of being treated, as it were, by an AI, right? They're very comfortable with that notion in a way that I think probably most of us are not at all. And as I said, to a certain extent, some of the problems they present can be, in the short term at least, in a practical way that gets them through the semester, right? Treated with the CBT models that these programs are now, for the most part, adapted after. But the situation at large is wholly inadequate in all of these ways. I think it's going to take a radical reconceptualization of higher education properly, meaningfully, to address the serious crisis that our young people are experiencing in the US, certainly, and I know elsewhere around the world. A reconceptualization that has a snowball's chance in hell of actually succeeding. So I'm quite pessimistic about the possibilities for these technologies, and even for human remediation. I'm sorry to be so pessimistic, and if you or others have anecdotes about more successful developments at other institutions, I'd be very eager to hear about them. We also bring real dogs onto campus during exam period, right? Where they're not. I mean, they're trained to some extent, but they're not fully trained therapy dogs. They're in some sort of intermediary training state where they know how to comport themselves around unpredictable groups of young people, but mostly they're there to be touched, right? They're there to provide an opportunity for the anxiolytic effect of contact with a furry creature, and that's great, right? I mean, that's wonderful, but that's only a few days at the end of every semester.
Thank you. It was fascinating. My question is, if it's not a question of reading the significant other. So in this case, the significant other is a machine, and on the long term, maybe all these demarcations blur. And I have a fantasy that maybe for students who are familiarized with all kind of technical tools and with therapy by robots, maybe the robot becomes the significant other and humans become the object of aggression. So you know what I mean? I mean that it is a question who or what is invested with emotional charge, and where does the aggression go? Yeah. Because the aggression needs some kind of possible ventile as well.
Absolutely, and that's exactly why I begin with a sort of comical kick and end by recurring to the very real dynamics between analyst and patient, and the very serious and necessary belief on the part of the patient, arriving at the belief that my aggressivity is not going to literally or figuratively kill my analyst, right? They're not going to abandon me. They're not going to turn against me. They can take a licking and keep on ticking, right? Just like Spot the robot. But for any sort of meaningfully adaptive reciprocity between a patient and a human or robotic therapist to emerge, that has to work both ways, right? And the aggressivity must be a part, right, of any sort of robotic subjectivity that's going to be able to engage in any sort of truly reciprocal relationship with a human being. And that's terrifying, right? Because what will that mean? Because like a big dog, like a big German Shepherd, like Anna Freud's first dog, robots are stronger than human beings and can do much more damage to them. And there are all sorts of less dramatic and gory and graphic ways in which an artificial intelligence could really screw up and psychically damage a patient, a young patient, who doesn't yet have a sense of what to expect, what to require from any therapist, human or not. So.
Okay, next question in the back, please. In the back, in the back.
Thank you. Thank you for this fascinating paper. I just have a quick question about objects and following on this intervention about aggression towards objects. And it's just the idea that the idea of inanimate objects or animated objects, and what is movement the determining factor in this? So if you kicked an object that would be having the shape of a dog, would that be the same as a moving dog? Or if you kick a vase that has no human movement, no possibility of movement, so so in this kind of ethics about objects, if we push the logic, like is there not something about the image? So in fact, like it's the image of a human, not of a living being. So it's just a question about where does the definition of object stops or begins?
You
see what
right,
I'm saying?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's becoming harder and harder to draw that line. Not only because more and more refined sorts of movements are being engineered in inanimate machines, but more responsive movements, right? Like the description of just that the Hasbro toy. I shouldn't call it a toy because it's a companion animal. It's meant to be. It's not a toy. It's for grown-ups, it does improve the health outcomes of many elderly patients, and that's been documented. But the responsiveness, right? The impression that it's able to create, that it's not only moving and therefore animate, but moving in a way that's responsive to your vocalizations or movements or what have you. And I think the next step. I mean, what this is looking forward to, and I think the not too very distant future is a responsiveness that's based on some sort of simulacra of affective and sensate experiences on the part of the machine.
But if we know that it's a simulacrum, what do we, like, so we have, it creates ethics of the image or of the semblance or something, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
You know it's an image, anyway, it's quite...
Right. Unless part of the way in which we co-evolve with these projected beings the way in which we co-evolve, as I suggested earlier, diminishes or eliminates the sense of the simulacrum, right? That we go beyond suspending disbelief or allowing ourselves to be tricked by the fakery of a robot that behaves as if it were real, but come to have a new sense of what it means to be real, to be a being with subjectivity. And toward which we therefore do have responsibility, just as we do to one another, to strangers, to each other. I think it's not so long ago that all of these ideas would have sounded just absurd. But they're not absurd any longer. They're not here yet. But the technology is clearly going to get to that point. And the question is, how are we as humans going to adapt to it or evolve with it? As we have over the last tens of thousands of years with canines, right? We are not the same species we would be if we hadn't, if a large part of our evolution as Homo sapiens hadn't occurred in direct correlation with the evolution of canines.
We have 3 more questions and a couple minutes left. If I may just quickly take up what you said and forbid yourself to speak of Hasbro, of the Hasbro dog as a toy, evoking fun, right?
Sure.
And my experience with these kinds of animal robots or human-like robots is there is always a slight smile, slight sense of smile and fun in the audience. And I guess it's not only about amusement, but also about the experiencing what might be possible, what we haven't yet thought of.
It's sort of a charm, right, rather than amusement.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think that's right. And perhaps also a certain amount of identification with the elderly person, right? Because we can all very easily imagine ourselves, and many of us have already been in situations in which, for whatever reason, we were unable to. We were people who live alone, who for one reason or another can't take on the responsibility of having an organic pet, right? They're not able to give it the care it needs. It's very easy to identify with that situation, and I think seeing the Hasbro pup and knowing, based on the studies that they've done, I mean, this has been around for a long time, that it actually does have empirically verifiable health benefits, right? That's reassuring, I think, to those of us who are nearing that stage of life, right? So I totally agree with you that it's more than just the tendency to diminish or trivialize or make fun of.
Right.
But much more than that.
So if you're okay with it, we can maybe collect the 3 remaining questions.
Of course.
Yeah. So first one from Stephen, and then in the front row.
Thank you. I found myself sort of invited into a phrase, kind of playful, kind of provocative, a robot dog is being beaten, around the questions of aggression and aggression's entanglements with desire, with pleasure, with masochism in the unconscious, with the question of fantasy, and with the amphimixis, perhaps in the unconscious of those conditions. And I wonder sort of about that path of thinking the subjectivity, also subjectivity as a sort of question of power relationships, as you sort of spoke about. I found myself also finding like a sort of counterpart phrase of a human as being chatted with.
Right, another form
but
of
rather than this sort of imitation, this mimicry of kind of affective states, but the question of unconscious fantasy in the condition of the subjectivity of what we might consider to be sort of technological sort of subjectivities, consciousnesses, et cetera. I don't know.
Yeah. I think I'm hearing 2 questions rather than one, but I'll try to answer what I think I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong. the notion of a robot as being beaten, I think, is speaks very much to the Kantian perspective, right? I mean, whether or not the dog is the robotic creature is harmed or is aware of being harmed or feels pain, the damage is done to the person who's beating the robot, right? That's the Kantian perspective, right? That's the Kantian answer to that question. But I think well. And how they might be much more likely to be precipitated by these sorts of relationships. Yeah. I think that's true. I think just as we've seen over the past couple of decades, a tremendous increase in the number of and increase in the seriousness with which these relationships are taken, the use of biological dogs, real dogs, as adjuncts in the psychotherapeutic, in the consulting room, right? I mean, that's been going on ever since Freud, but it hasn't been systematized and legitimized, begun to be, until very recently. And so now is the time when we're asking, as I do in this book that I'm writing about dogs and psychoanalysis, needing to think about the dog as a kind of psychoanalytic third, right? But the same question, I think, will ultimately need to be asked about these non-organic, sentient or subjectivized machines in the not-too-distant future. So there's another analogy, which might seem inadequate, as all analogies are seeming to these days.
Okay, if we might try and take the remaining two questions by Jenny and Ruth.
Thank you so much for this talk, and my question is actually very similar to what was just said as a robot is being beaten, like the question of affectivity and what it says about the humans and their interactions. I wanted to draw your attention on an example. I don't know if you know of it. In Finland, where I come from, they have made small robots that do groceries.
I'm sorry.
Small robots that do groceries. Groceries. They pick groceries, yes, and bring them to houses. So if you walk through the streets, you will meet these small things, and they are perceived as cute.
Yeah.
They do not look like animals, but they are round. The design is like round and white, and they have wheels, and they have these high flags, a bit like kids on bicycles, these high flags to show where they are, and then they stop before they cross the street, and everyone thinks they are cute. So if they fall over in the deep snow, people help them. And last time I was there, there are like videos of them. You can find lots of material. Last time I was standing with my son at a bus stop, and we watched one of these things that was looking for his destination and couldn't find it. And we watched this struggle and watched how it gave up and then went back. And it somehow, we couldn't help, like somehow feeling for it. I don't know.
That's a really interesting moment.
Yes, like really, it gave up.
The decision.
Yes, there was a moment where it gave up and went back because nobody picked up the groceries. And I wonder, they probably have attracted sadist impulses as well, which would be interesting to know. Like
teenage
and
boys.
And I was also thinking about Siri. I mean, this goes back way before ChatGPT, but the temptation to say abusive things to Siri, and Siri keeps serving. And that led me in the beginning to the thought, I mean, we have this fear, what if artificial intelligence starts to disobey? Perhaps it is even more frightening if they continue obeying. And like my relation with ChatGPT also has this dynamic. I ask ChatGPT something, and then ChatGPT answers like a mansplainer, and then I'm angry and correct ChatGPT. And then ChatGPT like switches completely and turns into the most obedient servant you can ever imagine, like on its knees. I'm so sorry for the mistake I made. And it's just like suddenly serving this fantasy of being, and it's just, and I find this quite uncanny as well. And I want to thank you so much for your wonderful talk.
I mean, you know, the possibilities for the experience of sadistic pleasure, I mean, are endless. Yeah, I don't know this particular robot that you're talking about, but you know, I'm thinking of the Roomba, right? The carpet cleaner, right? A very primitive version of what you're talking about. And you know, I think this almost automatic, it feels automatic, this tendency that we have to anthropomorphize even non-zoomorphic mechanical devices, robots, that sort of thing. It's going on for centuries, right? I mean, at the Kunsthistorische Museum here, right, they're incredible, intricate robotic devices from the 17th and 18th century. It's been overwhelmed by those. It's been going on a long time. And I think, you know, and you know, this is not an original point I'm making. Others are making this now, but it's a belated recognition that we have to stop beating ourselves up for anthropomorphizing, and recognize a very meaningful distinction between what's anthropomorphizing and what's anthropocentrizing, right? I mean, that we can't help but anthropomorphize. The question is what we do with our anthropomorphic, with the need to anthropomorphize, right? With our structural need to anthropomorphize the non-human other, and not to relate to it in an anthropocentric way, right? So that's the beginning of an answer to your question, is to mark that distinction sharply.
And the last one from Ruud.
So thank you. It was a fascinating story. So just to, I'm always a little bit, how do I say, all these worries around ChatGPT, and so it's not human and things like that, which I understand, of course. But my question is more on not on certain cases, but on the discourse that we are in which we are discussing these things. And then I'm thinking from a philosophical viewpoint, we have had Baudrillard, we have had Foucault, who said man is dead, and we have had Lacan. And so now you can make perfectly clear with Lacan that the symbolic order is not in need for you as a subject, but there is a symbolic order is going on, and as a subject you are going into that symbolic order. So what if the problem of the discussion is that we remain attached to the idea that we are subjects? So maybe we have to leave that idea and not going back to romanticism, we are feeling and you are not feeling, things like that. Wouldn't that be...
Thank you for that. Yes, that is the essential corrective. The push of the pendulum back in the other direction. Perhaps, who knows, but you know, perhaps the possibility of further and meaningfully confusing the distinction between organic and inorganic will be part of that philosophical and psychological relinquishment of the fetish of the subject. That may be utopian, but that's what comes to mind first. But it's...
Yeah, but it's also psychoanalytical. Because
sure. Oh, yeah.
I don't think that you are an ego that's in control.
Sure. Yeah. What are the ego psychologists going to do? Which is why the supplementation or the addition of the analytic third is so fascinating to me, both with relation to to these very sophisticated machines. It's another way of interfering with that, the danger of romanticizing the subject.
The danger in desubjectivity, I think.
Can you say just a bit more about what you mean by that?
I mean, it has to do with responsibility, and
Yeah.
it also has
Yeah.
to do with power relations.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And
Yes.
escape power.
Absolutely. 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 Yeah. I think. Yeah. It's. I'm thinking of my own experiences in analysis and various forms of psychotherapy, of the gratification that comes from the discovery that one can be bad and irresponsible and even violent, not physically violent, but violent in other ways, aggressive, tremendously aggressive, and witness the other surviving and experience survival oneself in the aftermath of that kind of gratification. And maybe that's something too that a robotic third could help facilitate. I don't know. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we can't do away with the subject any more than we can do away with anthropomorphism. But we must always remember not to idealize or romanticize things. So that's as much as I can say or should say.
I think we need to close it here. Thank you for this very long discussion.